While we're just over a month into 2021, the year has already brought big changes to the global conversation. In the United States, angry rioters tried to prevent a new presidential administration from taking power. COVID vaccines are being distributed around the globe, and last week, a group of Reddit traders totally upended the financial world. If you haven't been paying attention, here's what you missed. A group of rogue traders in the WallStreetBets Reddit forum set out to send GameStop Incorporated stock prices to the moon, and they did, to the tune of more than 1,100%. Why did they do this? Partially for profits and partially for revenge. The move is now being called the Big Short Squeeze, as Wall Street hedge funds are being forced to take losses or white knuckle their holdings into oblivion. And the game is far from over. Wall Street Bets is out for blood. At least one hedge fund has already sustained significant damage as a result. Melvin Capital reported losses amounting to 53% in January. The drop was so huge that two other large firms, Citadel and Point72, had to inject capital into Melvin just to keep it going. As such, Wall Street Bet's GameStop pump has sparked a global conversation, or rather a movement, centering around the role of retail traders in capital markets. Traders, CEOs, politicians, and artists alike are talking about how capital markets must be redesigned to accommodate retail traders, and in fact, that this should have happened long ago. Beyond that, spin off groups of retail investors have used Reddit to organize their powers around a number of other assets, including Dogecoin and XRP. Using their collective buying power, traders have pushed some of these assets more than 800%. As the movement continues, the whole world has its eye on what Wall Street Bets is up to next. Finance magnates had the opportunity to sit down with Jaime Rogozinski, founder of the Wall Street Bets subreddit, to discuss the Wall Street Bets movement, the GameStop saga, and what's next for Wall Street Bets. I'm Rachel McIntosh, and this is FMTV. Jaime, once again, thank you. And can you tell people who might not know who you are a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jaime Rogozinski. I am recently known for having founded the Wall Street Bets subreddit, the Wall Street Bets social media accounts, like everything that has to do with Wall Street Bets, which has clearly made a lot of news in the past week.
Yes.
Yeah, I was born in Mexico, lived some years here, some years in the U.S. Now I live in Mexico again.
Okay, awesome. So, like you said, there's been a lot of news happening, a lot of things going on. Did you ever think that when you started this, like that this would be the thing that it turned into, that this is what would happen?
No, not in a million. I had the hope, a deep down hope, that at some point the types of things that were going on Wall Street Bets would generate some type of conversation. We have been in the news in the past for some relatively high profile things that had happened, but it was still very much isolated to the world of finance. But what's happened this past week is absolutely not something that I would have ever anticipated.
Yeah, and so how did the group get to this point? Like, from something that you started into this like global financial movement.
I think, I mean, the mechanics of it was simple. I started it in 2012, and it starts growing. It starts getting more attention. It's doubling every year in size, pretty consistently throughout the past few years. I think a lot of what's happened that's caused a lot of this growth has been a couple of things. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
it's been the access to financial markets. When I got started, we were still early stages of these discount brokers. They still charged commission for making stock trades or stock option trades, but they were much cheaper relative to what they were previously. There was a lot more variety. They were internet based, and it was relatively uh, simple to get started. Not nearly as simple as it is today. You still have to fill out paperwork and sign it and wait several days to fund the account and things of that nature. Um, but as time progressed, we start seeing more and more brokers come into the scene, more and more financial tools through ETFs. Stock options are starting to become very popular, and you have different types of stock. You start having what's called mini stock options, which are basically a less expensive version of the stock option. You start seeing all sorts of other things like fractional share purchases, which allow people to buy little bits of a share, which is useful when shares are really expensive. So
Mhm.
pretty much anybody could start participating in the market. So that's one side. And on the other side, I think it was a cultural shift. I think that since 2008, there's been some distrust. This was a lot of these things are in a book that I wrote, and I published it last year before even coronavirus was
Mm.
out, and I outlined a lot of these different points that this generation, this is going to be the millennial generation or the Generation Z, they know about the stock market, but they grew up with a mindset where they can't quite trust it, but they can use it to try and make some money. So,
Right.
people, the forum itself is very relaxed. It's very honest. It's very funny, very
Yes.
crude, and it's very entertaining. To be honest with you, I think that's why it attracts a lot of people. It's
Mhm.
straight up fun. You see some outlandish things take place. You see some very insightful things to take place, and it's been great. I was actively a moderator of Wall Street Bets from the point that I created it when there were zero followers all the way up until April of last year, and so I've gotten to see it go through every single possible growth stage.
Okay, and so now, what has your role been since April of last year? Are you still sort of actively participating, or are you watching from afar?
Yeah, I mean this particular event, I'm watching it from afar.
Mm.
I'm not involved in the subreddit, at least. I have uh, sort of all the social media accounts, the YouTube, Twitter, we have Instagram, we have all sorts of different ones that are going on. I wrote the book and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I'm involved in. Obviously, I keep tabs on what's going on with both the subreddit as well as in the finance world.
Okay. Yeah, but you kind of been spreading your wings a little bit, branching out and doing more since April of last year.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. So I want to touch on something that you said a couple minutes ago, which is about how the financial world has changed since 2012 and how things are kind of more accessible than they were back in those days. And we've seen, apps like Robinhood come out with, this word democratize, which has kind of been all over the place in the financial world, was particularly within the last couple of years. Um, I mean, so they all these different services have basically built the infrastructure and the tools for something like this to happen. But now that it has happened, there's been quite a lot of pushback. We've seen Robinhood shut down their trading of certain assets. For kind of dubious reasons, and obviously a lot of uproar and topsy turvy things happening in the hedge fund world. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do these platforms proceed, having given tools to these investors and now sort of dealing with the consequences of that?
Back in 2012, I knew about the stock market, I knew about finance, I knew about the mechanics of these things before, uh, dating back to probably high school. But right around 2012, when I'm starting to get myself really involved in getting my hands dirty and start reading about these different things,
Hmm.
I learned about ETFs, and more specifically these so-called exotic synthetic ETFs, which are fancy words that masquerade all sorts of things. But um, when I broke down what exactly these things were, these are tools. These are things that you can basically trade like stocks, and they represent other
Hmm.
things underneath it. So you can buy, for example, an ETF for gold if you don't want to physically go out to the store and buy gold. You can buy shares in an ETF for the S&P 500, for example, if you don't want to have to buy and properly weight 500 different companies. So they're kind of useful, but then you start seeing some of these inverse leveraged meaning you get 2 or 3 times the return, inverse meaning they give you the opposite. And it occurs to me, wow, this is really dangerous. I think there's a reason why you shouldn't be allowed to short sale, and these guys are allowing you to short sell 3 times as much. And I noticed there's cracks in the system, and from
Hmm.
that point is when I start keeping my eye on things. So now we can fast forward to these brokers that are coming in, very fast growth that's so fast that I believe that they weren't able to keep up with the changes in time.
Hmm.
And you start seeing some fragility, some weaknesses in how these different components interact with each other. And once again, this is a lot about the things that I wrote about, that Wall Street isn't prepared to have huge numbers of retail traders that are trading very differently from institutional investors.
Right.
And by differently, I mean they're taking risk. They're doing things that aren't necessarily rational to a typical economist or a fundamental investor, but they're using it well knowing the risks they're taking. And so what you start seeing after that is some examples of systems breaking. You know, before this GameStop episode, we had a rather famous situation last year where some user figured out that he could get a lot of leverage. In fact, he could get infinite leverage if he really wanted to. Deposit a few $1,000s, and he could balloon that amount into really, really astronomically big, buying power and capacity to make these bets. Yeah, obviously they fixed that loop, and there's been some other things like that. In what we saw yesterday, what we saw last week, and I think this week, to some extent, I've seen some reports about this, is very much the fact that this industry grew so fast, and these problems or the infrastructure is not set up to be able to handle these things. You know, we had Robinhood, we had 12 different brokers. Obviously, everyone likes to talk about Robinhood. But a lot of brokers have this situation. They have to cancel trades with shares, and basically it's because the volume was too high, the prices had changed way too much. There's all these back end wheeling and dealing settlements and clearing houses and capital requirements and collateral. You know, there's a whole system in place that I think is well intentioned, but clearly was never designed to make room for the little guys. It was never, you know, whatever that entire process is. And so while you hear a lot of these explanations being given out as a reason, it wasn't our fault, you know, it's the way that the rules are set up. Sure, point fingers if you'd like, but the people that ended up getting hurt at the end were the retail investors. Clearly, they're at an unfair advantage. The system hasn't been designed so that individuals can participate in the market in the way that they choose to.
So what do you see like moving forward? I mean, like obviously there's already been some conversation with regulators, like, and that sort of thing. That this is going to sort of, this is the thing that's going to lead to some kind of a systemic change. I mean, it's not completely clear what that's going to look like, but what do you think? You know, sort of in the short term, what's going to change with that back end financial infrastructure, and possibly also, you know, talking in a sort of regulatory sense in terms of the ways that platforms like, you know, Robinhood or other brokers deal with these huge amounts of retail investors?
You know, I'm watching this very closely
Yeah.
because it's a very complicated topic.
Yeah.
And there's two very strong opposing sides to these arguments. There's some overlap over these arguments, but they're looking for different things. You know, the regulatory bodies, the regulations, the laws that exist, the tools that they have, I don't think we're designed to be able to handle the age of social media.
Right.
And I think that's never been more evident than now. I just read a report that this investigation could take up to years before they really figure out what's taking place, and I can see why. What are the changes can look like? I don't know. I know that there's definitely going to be some change. I've been through enough changes in the US, large scale social changes that begin with conversations like this. You have some type of catalyst, and then people start weighing in. In this case, we've seen politicians and artists and businessmen and CEOs all weigh in. We saw this with gay rights. We saw this with marijuana legalization. We've seen it with a handful of other things. And I believe this is the beginning of just this type of conversation. I believe next week or sometime in February, they're going to start having their congressional hearings and blah, blah, blah. What are the changes? I see it twofold. I think the SEC wants to make sure that the markets remain stable. They want to make sure no one's being defrauded. This is an interesting situation because a lot of the rules regarding manipulation and pumping and dumping and all sorts of different things revolve around the fact that you're being fraudulent, that you're trying to take someone's money away, you know, to try to lie or try to sell your shares to some unwitting victim. This isn't the case here. Here, these people are fine with the risk. They're okay with losing money. Not everybody, obviously, but a lot of the people that are behind these types of trades, they're buying stock options, which by definition are most likely going to result in a 100% loss.
Yeah.
they're fine with this. So the regulators have to kind of figure out exactly what the deal is. There's, and looking at it from that perspective, they're not lying. They're saying just buy the stock because we want it to go up, or because we're trying to take the other side of the trade as these short sellers. But on the other hand, what we've seen with these stock prices is not normal. That is not a stable stock market. That is not something that's even closely resembling what it's supposed to look like. Not that it resembles what it's supposed to look like anyways, but that's just a little too far out there. They were halting the trades for that stock like 12, 13 times in a day. So they want to make sure that they find a way to stabilize this thing, and they have to find ways to make sure that the market keeps working and there's no disruptions there. Then the other conversations that that can be had. I've seen conversations. I've seen discussions revolving around short selling. Short selling is something that can only be done in the U.S. They say, well, maybe it shouldn't do it elsewhere. That maybe we shouldn't do it here. It's only destruction of value. There's no productive outcome. I don't necessarily agree or disagree with that. It's much more nuanced, that particular conversation, but that's being had. The other conversation that's being had is, hey, it's time for the little guys. Just because we're finally participating and we're actually being collectively a player that's competing with these large firms, it's not fair that they shut off the valve and they stop allowing us to trade. Blame whoever you want. They're still the victims in this particular case because they ended up losing money. They were, they were unable to participate in the trading. So a little bit of, hey, let's look at the strength of the system to make sure it keeps working, and let's try to stabilize this. You have a little bit of let's make some rules for the little guys. There's a lot of similar tones that I'm hearing back from the Occupy Wall Street movement. That entire episode never ended up really having much closure. So I think that there's a lot of feelings that are kind of pent up again. And even though the economy is not the same situation, even if you factor in coronavirus, we're not in a financial crisis, but people remember it, and people, I think, still are still upset and are still excited about seeing some change. And then you see some arguments towards the side protecting the funds against this type of short squeeze. Short squeezes have happened forever. But they simply got caught, and they lost a lot of money. And so surely they're going to be advocating for putting some type of stop to these collective efforts to take the other side of the trade. So we'll see where it goes. All I know is that there's conversations taking place, and this is the way change begins.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm happy you mentioned Occupy Wall Street, because I kind of the conversation around this whole thing on Twitter, all these retail investors, it seems like some of them are sort of in it for like the fun, as you mentioned earlier, like they're sort of talking about it in that way. But there's also been like these other people who sort of are, real or not real, are telling like these personal stories about how like their fathers lost their jobs, and like how they were at the Occupy Wall Street movement and watched Wall Street traders drinking champagne like while the protests were happening, and this is like so much more than just about taking profits or sort of gamifying the stock market. That this is emotional, and I wonder how important is that to what's happening now, and also what could that mean for how far this goes into the future, how far we see GME rise, and beyond GME, other stocks as well.
The feelings around Occupy Wall Street were real.
Yeah.
The lives were very much affected, and generations, their psyche was affected as well. You have kids that are graduating from college around this time with huge amounts of debt and no job, having to move into their parents' basement, and sometimes their parents lose that house too, right? It's that was an important chapter in this generation and all the generations that lived through that crisis, and I think it's marked them to some extent. So is there feelings that are pent up? Yeah, I think that the world is in a better place. We've recovered from the financial crisis. Not sure that any lessons were really learned. There's been some mechanisms in place to try and prevent it. I know that banks have these stress tests to make sure they simulate liquidity crunches similar to what was seen back then. But I haven't seen well, yeah, I don't think that's nearly enough, and I
Mhm.
don't think people think that that's nearly enough. I think they see the bailout of the banks by the government is unfair,
Yeah.
uh, and they bailed them out instead of the people that lost their homes.
Mhm.
Nowadays, you're not seeing quite that same feel. Coronavirus hit the world unexpected, nobody's fault. But the government turns around and is helping, especially within the US, is helping the individual people. They sent out
Mm.
stimulus checks, they sent out the famous PPP loans for the businesses, and there was direct support for the individual. So the feelings of the government doesn't care about the little guy, I don't think is necessarily there. But they remember what happened last time, and they're bringing that to the table too, saying, "Hold on a second, we've finished talking about this.
Mm.
Let's go ahead and finish this now." I think a lot of people are feel some sort of joy about the fact that the large institutions are losing money, or some of them lost money. They were able to knock out, or at least force, Melvin Capital to get additional funding so that they could survive, and they have to get bailed out by their fellow um, hedge funds. I think there's an element of a feel good story there, somewhat of a David v. Goliath. And I think that's part of what's making this really an interesting story to follow.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's you're so right. It's like it's this has sort of become like this mythological thing. It's not, just like, oh, haha, look at this price of GameStop go up and look at Melvin Capital lose 53% of its value in the month of January. It's also like there's this narrative that's kind of been building for quite some time that's now sort of coming to fruition in this way.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think is next for this whole thing? Like, is are people going to continue to pump GME? Is this going to turn into some kind of more organized thing, or maybe perhaps the formation of more organized groups that do this to certain stocks? I mean, what do you think?
You know, the internet is unpredictable. I think
True.
that if anyone had the answer to that question, they'd be able to make a lot of money. It's impossible. You see a video of a guy on TikTok riding down with a skateboard, drinking cranberry juice, and it's just a global sensation. What made that? What made that a viral video is impossible to determine. It's easy to
Right.
know why this GME, this GameStop saga is popular. It's easier to pinpoint this the elements underneath it, but it's impossible to tell. It's impossible to tell what they're going to do.
Mm.
Maybe they'll try to do it again. Maybe they will change their change their ways, find something new to do. I've been seeing um, a lot of different conversations about the different possibilities. I think that the individual people feeling empowered now, and I think that there's also going to be somewhat of a process for those realizations to really mature and to see what it is they're going to do. At the end of the day, retail investors and Wall Street bets and Robinhood people, you know, there's no leader that's leading the charge. Even though I started in Wall Street Bets, I never once started something like this. I'm making sure the conversation was contained and relevant and within the confines of the law, and making sure the place is entertaining and things of that nature. But there's no person leading the charge, and that's a little bit of what we see today in the democracy, the democratization of social media. You
Yeah.
have millions of voices, informal processes for decision making, and definitely impossible to predict. They all communicate, they all contribute, they all like, dislike, vote up, vote down, retweet, whatever, and things take on a life of their own. It's difficult to see. I've seen um, Wall Street bets replicas pop up in different countries. I've been asked on Twitter and different ways that people reach me, for me to start Wall Street bets in the Netherlands and India.
Wow.
I think a lot of people want this. This is a global situation. Obviously, in the U.S., it's a big story because it applies directly to them. But you're starting to see evidence of people wanting to recreate this, and power to them. I think that it's a wonderful thing that people take charge. It's wonderful to see that voices that previously weren't able to get it out there are able to get it out there, participate.
So what do you say when people ask you to start a Wall Street Bets in the Netherlands or India or other places in the world?
I, I respond to about 12% of the messages that I'm
Okay. Well, thank you
and,
for responding to
and
mine.
I, yeah, and I'm talking. I got a message from a taxi cab driver in Spain telling me I don't know anything about finance. I just want to say thank you. You're a hero here. Keep it up. It's wonderful messages of encouragement all over the world. It really does feel good. I've been so inundated with messages that I'm lucky to read the message, let alone reply to them.
How are you? Like, how are you doing?
Good.
Like,
I'm living my
yeah,
life as my wife's birthday was on Monday. We went for a quick little getaway trip for the weekend. I've obviously been doing a lot of interviews
yeah.
since last week, but I still have, I still work. I'm very much dedicated to that. I don't plan on
Mm.
making changes with regards to that. We still have my two kids that I help watch out for and give them their dinner, take them to daycare. I'm living my life as normal. I think that this is a news cycle that will come and go. I've had these news cycles before. This is by far the biggest one. It's hard to make the comparison because of
Mm.
the magnitude and scope. But I do know that news stories will pop up and this will subside, and I want to make sure that I continue living my life as normal.
Right, right. I mean, like, yeah, but how does it feel to kind of be like a part of history in this way?
It feels good. I suppose. Like, honestly, I haven't had the time to fully absorb
Of
the
course, yeah.
magnitude of this. I'm enjoying being part of the conversation. I'm enjoying watching this. I'm very uh, I like to take an academic standpoint and intellectual standpoint, studying the different components and the complexities of it instead of just having blacks and whites. And there's a lot of gray areas in this story, which I'm just loving every second of it. We'll see once the dust settles exactly what ends up happening. So until that happens, I think I'm just gonna continue living my life. Giving interviews when I'm able to, and helping be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Do you have any hopes for what would where this will go and what would happen, even if it is just a sort of shift in the narrative?
No, I think my hopes have been achieved. The conversation took place. I
Okay.
think that I'm a firm believer of democracy and the voices being heard, and I believe in the process of democracy. I believe I trust in the system of democracy, and I trust that things will go where they need to go. There's clearly a lot of problems that were outlined. I'd love to see some of them be addressed. The strength of the financial system needs to be addressed and needs to be updated to be able to make room for this new wave of investors, the new digital age of instant information and social media. I'd like to be able to see the playing field be level a little bit, making sure that everybody has an equal say and equal rights, and the power is distributed correctly. This is more of a conversation of who gets to participate in Wall Street, and less of a conversation of the 1% versus 99%.
Mm.
It's implied a little bit, uh, but I think that what they're saying is, look, if the 99% can at least also have the same play by the same rules, that then they have at least an equal shot. They just want to be able to be equals at this, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm really looking forward to seeing how this plays out.
Absolutely. Jamie, are you involved in the kind of the crypto world at all?
No, I followed it very closely. I followed it
Okay.
for a very long time. I followed it since it started. I think it's fascinating. I'm very much an advocate of the idea behind it, but I'm not super involved. That is its own super strong community with very strong opinions, and I understand them. I've studied them. I understand the technologies. I understand money. I studied economics. I get it. I think it's a wonderful idea. It's still maturing. We've seen that Bitcoin has been accepted by governments and Wall Street, and so that makes it legitimate as it gets, and it's here to stay. And that makes room for a lot more opportunities in that world. The technology that powers the cryptocurrencies is also wonderful. It can be applied for things outside of actual uh, currencies, and I've seen lots of different applications that are useful. So I think that it's a wonderful bit of technology. I think that it's a fascinating experiment that's now more than an experiment. Now it's actually it's an official reality of this new digital age of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, being somebody who sort of follows the crypto world very closely as a reporter, there's been a lot of talk, about the intersection of these two things, Wall Street bets, and also just like the growing decentralized finance movement, which uh, in many ways, like both of these movements are sort of fighting for the same thing, which is like, as you were saying, equal rights and like the ability to participate in the financial system, like for everyone. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, on DeFi, or feel like you've already said everything that needs to be said?
My opinions are not interesting. I mean, like there's parallels between the two.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
my opinions were much more interesting as these things were developing, and I had my predictions
Right.
with regards to how things would play out, and I enjoyed the early conversations because it was clear that few people on both sides, on both the crypto advocates as well as we'll call them establishment, that there was a lot of misunderstanding with how these things all kind of play in together. Of course, once reality kicks in, everyone kind of gets a point, and they become accepted. So my opinions with regards to it's such a complicated topic. It would have to be
Yeah.
a bit more. There's parallels towards it. I can see how globalization is a thing, and it happens both. It's happening both within the stock market with financial tools as well as with cryptocurrencies. It's yet another um, tool. It's another avenue in order to get to the same democratization.
Jaime, I want to thank you so much for your time. You might have just made my career. I wish you all the best of luck with everything that you do. Of
No, thank you very much for having me. Have a good one.
course. You too.
Take care.
Okay. Yeah. So let me know if this is okay to post tomorrow.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
not,
Let me
that's
just
totally
give you the
fine.
green. I'll give you the green light. There's just so many.
For more news, events, and podcasts like this one, visit us at financemagnates.com. Thanks for listening.